why can't some people fall asleep, right? So I think we touched upon it briefly before the interview. Around 1/3 of the population, so 1 in 3 adults, has a sleep issue, which is a massive number of people. Even if it's 1 in 4 people and not 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 people, it's still a huge number of people who have sleep disorders. The most
Hey listeners, welcome back to the Value Bridge podcast. And today I'm here with Alen Juginović. He's Croatian and like a ton of interesting stories. Maybe you should watch part one when I interviewed him maybe 1.5 years ago or something like that. But yeah, today we have new questions for Alen, and maybe you can say a couple of words before I bombard you with questions from my friends, family, and listeners. So yeah.
everyone. So David, it's always a great pleasure to chat with you and just give a brief introduction in 2 sentences. So you mentioned my name and you mentioned I'm Croatian. Those are probably two most important things, right? But yeah, apart from being Croatian, apart from being named Alen, I'm originally a physician from Croatia, so a doctor from Croatia, a sleep doctor, as people would say. And now I do sleep research at Harvard Medical School. So I'm trying to figure out why and how poor sleep impacts health in general. And in parallel to that, I also see patients in the sleep clinic. We talked about the new sleep clinic in Croatia that we're going to open, and it's really a great feeling that you can do both research in sleep and actually see patients with sleep disorders and help them resolve those sleep disorders. And apart from that, I'm involved in quite a bit of projects regarding organizing with a great team of people international conferences and collaborating through my organization in Croatia, which is a non-governmental organization, collaborating with research labs and clinics from leading US hospitals and universities in order to form internship programs so that Croatian physicians and young scientists and medical students can actually attend those internships and learn as much as possible and broaden their horizons. So that's kind of a few sentences about me.
Yeah, and I think,
I love investing. I didn't even mention that.
yeah, true. That's actually how we connected. So I'll just tell the story real quick. Basically, I was just on LinkedIn regularly and saw these connection requests from a Harvard professor, and I was like, "What? This is crazy!"
Who's
And then
this
I
guy?
sent you a message, and then we connected from there, and I learned you were interested in investing and so on. So yeah, I guess
Amazing.
we struck a friendship from that, just to
Yeah.
contextualize people.
Friendship
And
through money, I'm
yeah,
joking.
yeah. Anyway, I think you do so many things that you actually forgot about your book.
I did.
uh, yeah, so maybe you could tell us a bit more about that, because honestly, before we started recording, you mentioned about it, but I honestly haven't looked at it and what is it about. So maybe you can
Yeah.
just also talk a bit more about that before we
Of
jump into
course,
the question.
just briefly, and not to be self-promotional because that's not the goal. So I just got the copy of my book yesterday, I think, which is called Sleep Science Made Simple. So it's about making sleep science simple for everyone to understand. So the book is published with Springer, the publishing company. Some people tell me it's pronounced Springer. I don't know if it's Springer or Springer, but one of the two. And people who are interested in understanding sleep, why sleep is important, what is sleep, and the sleep disorders that are very common in the population in an easy to understand language, they can buy the book basically anywhere they want. And if they enjoy it, they can also email me and say, hey, I bought the book, I enjoyed the book, thank you, and that'd be great. If they didn't enjoy it, the feedback would be good as well. So
Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely grab a copy now that I know that you have a book. So,
I can send you a copy.
oh yeah, maybe a signed copy. I accept it. Otherwise,
Exactly.
yeah.
And then you sell it on eBay for more. So
Yeah, definitely. Flipping the book, but anyway, let's start from the first question I have for you, and it says, "Why do some people fall asleep so easily while others don't? For example, why can some people sleep with noise around them while others can't, or why do some people take a long time to fall asleep and others don't?" I guess you partially answered this question before we started recording, but yeah, just
yeah,
just wanted to know
yeah.
your thoughts.
Of course. So, sleep is, I always call it, it's a whole body process. So it's not just, about the brain. Many
Mm,
people think about sleep as, it's the brain and everything else we can ignore. But the truth is, every single cell in your body, meaning your skin cell, your liver cell, your immune cells, every single cell in your body has what we call a small clock. We call it a circadian clock, and every
mm,
single cell has that small clock, and that clock basically tells the cell whether it's day or night outside. And depending on the time of day, whether it's day or night outside, the cell does different biological functions. And because of that, it's super important to sleep during the night in continuity 7 to 9 hours. So this is just briefly. But the question you posed is, why can't some people fall asleep, right? So I think we touched upon it briefly before the interview. Around one third of the population, so 1 in 3 adults, has a sleep issue, which is a massive number of people. Even if it's 1 in 4 people and not 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 people, it's still a huge number of people who have sleep disorders. The most common sleep disorder is insomnia, and insomnia is classified as the inability to either fall asleep or maintain sleep in continuity during the night. So many people can't fall asleep, and the most common reason for not being able to fall asleep is stress. So whether it's stress from the environment, from work stress, from financial markets going down or up, depending on what you're doing, that stress can actually cause you not to be able to fall asleep. And probably most of us have experienced that stress induced, insomnia. The other reasons, if we ignore sleep disorders, most common reasons are people just not being able to relax during the
mm,
night, meaning before sleep, meaning they're on their phone, they're on their email, they're on WhatsApp, or they're looking at some news which is disturbing, right? Wars going around the world or something like that, and then they become upset and then they can't fall asleep. Even if we ignore all of that, the next common cause is light. So, if people leave the room light on, the chances of them falling asleep are much lower compared to a completely dark room. Why is that the case? Because light is the main signal to our brain to determine whether it's day or night outside. And when I say
mhm,
light, I mean sunlight, room light, light from the laptop, from the phone screen, any sort of light. Of course, there are different, the sensitivity of the brain is different to each wavelength of light, but generally speaking, light tells your brain it's day outside. But the problem is when it's midnight, right? Your internal circadian clock is saying, well, it's night outside because it's midnight, but the light coming through your eyes is telling your brain, hey, it's actually day outside. And those
mm,
conflicting signals can make people can make falling asleep very difficult for some people. So the first kind of point is you should turn the light completely off. Other
mhm,
reasons why people can't fall asleep or can't maintain sleep, apart from all the sleep disorders, are people drink or eat too much before bed. So ideally, you wouldn't want to drink alcohol at all, ever,
mhm,
but especially before sleep. So drinking alcohol 1 or 2 or 3 hours before sleep is most definitely going to ruin your sleep quality, and you're going to wake up during the night to go to the bathroom to urinate. And
mm,
that's unfortunately the truth for the majority of people who drink alcohol. Next, if you eat heavy meals before going to bed, so having very late dinner, you come from, yes, wherever you are, you come at 11 p.m. or midnight, and then you have your big dinner. That's not great for your sleep because you're not going to be able to fall asleep. Or even if you fall asleep, you're just going to feel tired and miserable in the morning because all of that food needs to be processed. And it's not great if you process it during the nighttime, right? So you need to
mm,
process the food. You want to process the food during the daytime and not the nighttime. So these are just a few things that make people that make falling asleep or maintaining sleep difficult for many people. And insomnia. I mentioned 1 in 3 people. Insomnia is the most common sleep disorder, and the majority of people, even more than 1 in 3 adults, at a certain point in life experience insomnia. And it's
Right.
important to, first of all, understand that you're having insomnia and that you don't have to necessarily go take a medication, a pill, to resolve the issue. There are many other things that you can do in order to help you resolve insomnia, but some people, of course, end up on medications, which can, some people, for medications obviously can help you, but for some people they can't help some people, and then they need to resort to other options. So it's, even though, and I'll finish with this, and I can obviously talk forever. Even though insomnia seems very simple, I can't fall asleep, I can't maintain sleep, the underlying cause may be very complex. It could be a whole host of medical conditions that can cause insomnia, and treating insomnia is really not straightforward, but very personalized depending on the cause of insomnia.
Mm.
So I'll stop there, and feel free to interrupt me at any
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah. No, I didn't interrupt you because I think what you said was very interesting. Um, I wanted to ask you if there is a point to be made where like the second order emotions about insomnia can actually self-reinforce insomnia.
Of
So
course.
I'll explain this for maybe people. I think you understood what I'm trying to say, but
Hmm.
some people might not. So you basically feel like worried that you're not sleeping, and the next day you're going to, like, I guess, wake up early and you won't get your 8 hours of sleep, and then you just reinforce that feeling of not being able to sleep and so on. So it, how do you stop that, or like how do you, for the
Yeah.
people that actually feel that?
Of course. So that's very common. When some people go to bed, they see after 10 or 15 minutes, I can't fall asleep, and then start stressing out because they can't fall asleep. And then
Yeah.
obviously that worsens the problem. And that's very, very common. Several different things that you can do. One, if this, so let's divide this into this being a persistent problem, meaning
Mm.
weeks and months, the
Mm.
same things happening, or being a very short term, 3 days or 2 days, or you're sick and then you go to bed and can't fall asleep and then get stressed, and then in the end, you fall asleep. So for short term periods, a few days, a week, really nothing super specific should or can be done. Of course,
Mm.
I could give you a few suggestions, but for these short-term periods, it doesn't really matter all that much. What you can do is something called sleep hygiene. So sleep
Mm.
hygiene is a set of activities that people can do before sleep to help them fall asleep quicker or maintain sleep. So apart from, we mentioned a few earlier, so no lights in the room, no alcohol before sleep, no eating before sleep, no usage of your phone before bed, even with the blue light filter. So that's the most common question when I say, hey, but I use a blue light filter. That's great, but you're still using your phone. Okay.
Mm.
So don't use your phone, don't use your laptop at least 20, 30 minutes before bed.
Mm.
Try creating a de-stress routine. So some people take a warm bath, some people take a cold bath. Really
Mm.
depends on the individual. Anything, or some people even meditate or do mindfulness, exercise and so on and so forth. Anything that makes you relax before bed, because if you're stressed, anxious, you're not going to be able to fall asleep. And ideally, you want to be able to fall asleep within 15 minutes of going to bed. You go to bed, turn the lights off, 15 minutes. If you can't fall asleep, it's pointless to force yourself to try to fall asleep. Try to get out of bed, walk around, sit on the sofa, sit on the balcony if you have a balcony, and then after 5, 10, 15 minutes, try to go back to bed. That helps some people. So don't
Mm.
force yourself. But there are also two exercises that are very simple and that help many people fall asleep. One, it's called deep breathing exercise. So, deep
Mm.
breathing exercise, all of this sounds kind of complicated, but it's all very simple. So, deep
Mm.
breathing exercise is basically when you go to bed, you sit on your bed, you're in your pajama, and you're right about to, fall asleep, lay down. So you do this deep breathing exercise. It's also called a 4-7-8 exercise, meaning 4-7-8 is the number of seconds you need to do each step of breathing, which means 4 seconds, you inhale for 4 seconds, then you hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then you exhale for 8 seconds. The point of this is not for you to breathe, because obviously you can do all of this in half a second, but the point is to relax. So just
Mm.
relax and repeat that cycle 2 or 3 or 4 times. After that, you do something that's called progressive muscle relaxation. Again, sounds complicated, but it's very actually simple. You lie in bed in your pajama, just about to fall asleep. And then what you do is you want to contract and relax each muscle group, starting from your feet to your forehead, meaning from your toes, then to your feet, then to your calves. All of the muscle groups contract and hold for at least several seconds. The point is you want to hold as long as you possibly can and then relax. And each muscle group. Why is this important? Because you want to actually tire yourself. You want to become slightly tired, because when you're more tired, you're more prone to fall asleep. So the deep breathing should ideally relax you, and the progressive muscle relaxation should make you more tired, and the combination should make you fall asleep quicker. So that's something very simple and which helps quite a lot of people. Last thing I'll say is, and I know this is not possible for many people, unfortunately, the timing of sleep is very important. I should say the consistency of the timing of sleep, meaning
Mm.
you should ideally go to sleep and wake up at the same time every day, regardless if it's the weekend or weekday. So if you go to
Mm.
sleep at midnight, you wake up at 7. Try to keep that schedule plus minus 15 minutes during the whole week, because at midnight your body then knows, okay, I should go to sleep. And not that you go to sleep one day at 9, one day at 3 a.m., one day at midnight, and then you don't even know when you should go to sleep. So that's very, very important. But unfortunately, many people, because of work, lifestyle, all that stuff, cannot do that.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that was a very good answer. And one of the things, because I just like to try out things for myself, and one of the things that I guess worked a lot for me a couple of years ago was just like relaxing my face. I guess I saw somewhere that pilots or something use this. I don't know if it's true or not, but
Okay.
yeah, just I thought it was very like relaxing. And I guess it's also just the routine of doing that, and then you prime yourself to kind of sleep, right? So it's
Yeah.
it's it's interesting. I guess there's a lot of methods you can kind of
Yeah.
try.
It is fascinating when you think about sleep as a state in which you spend a third of your life. I mean, just think about it. If you live 90 years, you spend 30 years in this state that you're not even conscious that you're sleeping, right? You close
Mhm.
your eyes and then voila, you wake up after 7, 8 hours. It's amazing to me how little attention some people pay to sleep quality. They
Mhm.
almost take it like, oh, sleep, I'm gonna sleep when I'm dead, that sort of mentality. But if you do that mentality, you're gonna probably die earlier than most people, because of the all the risks that poor sleep actually increases, from heart attack, from stroke, all of those things.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it's. I guess when I was young, I used to think like sleep was a waste of time, but now I
Yeah.
just feel like it's the like the best use of my time. Obviously, if you sleep all day, it's not beneficial, but yeah, it's great. I guess
Yeah.
it feels good.
It's at, I would say, at least 7 hours for adults. And I know
Mhm.
when people tell me, hey, but I need to work, I need to do this and that. Okay, but why not think about sleep as a period in the day when you're actually investing in your long-term health? That's how I put it, right? You sleep today for a healthier tomorrow. You don't
Mhm.
sleep, and if you don't sleep today, literally tomorrow you're going to feel tired, miserable, not concentrated, low energy, and how are you going to do anything as
Yeah.
efficiently as when you're sleeping normally? So
Mhm.
that's how I kind of frame it for people.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Another interesting thing that you do is like teach this neuro one-on-one class at
True.
Harvard. So I want to ask you, what have you personally learned about dealing with emotions? Because I guess that's one of the things
Yeah.
that you you discuss in this class. And then I have a follow up more in regards to the students. But yeah, maybe you should start with this one.
Yeah. Um, don't make decisions hot-headed, even
Mhm.
though when you're in that moment, everything seems so, I don't want to say natural, but somehow logical. I'm not going to change my mind tomorrow, but you actually are going to change your mind
Mhm.
tomorrow when you're actually, emotionless, or, less anxious and stressed and so on and
Mhm.
so forth. And emotions are, it's amazing how many emotions humans can experience within 10 minutes, 5 minutes,
Mhm.
a whole roller coaster of emotions. I mean, we talk about investing, you can experience that in 1 second there, right?
Mhm.
Investing, let alone 10 minutes. But really, how emotions can guide people to good and bad decisions is fascinating without you even realizing at that specific moment that emotions are actually guiding you, but only in retrospect, or most of the time in retrospect you think, oh, actually I was too stressed or too anxious or too sad, and then that guided me in a specific decision. So I try to be, and this is going to sound very cold, I try to be emotionless, and the key
Mhm.
word is try, because it's extremely difficult. Emotionless when you're trying to help patients, for example, because some of the patient stories are very, disturbing, distressing, sad, and you have to be, cool-headed and cool-minded to make a rational decision. If you have too much empathy and you become too emotional, it can become very difficult for you to help the person in the optimal way.
Mhm.
So I try to be as cool-headed as possible when it comes to helping people and doing projects. So project management all carries so much stress and all of those crazy emotions, but you have to try to understand when your emotions are flipping. And if you
Mhm.
understand, hey, my emotions are about to flip, first of all you're conscious of it, and then try to control and manage those emotions, because in my experience all the bad things happen when you're super stressed, super anxious, and you just make wrong decisions most of the
Mhm.
time. So
Yeah.
I learned to try to recognize the emotion and control the emotion, but try.
Yeah.
I can't obviously succeed all the time.
Yeah. So I guess the key is also the self awareness, right? So
Extremely important.
yeah.
Extreme, and it's important to be aware of your emotions. I would argue that most people are not self-conscious of the emotions they're going through,
Mm.
because if they were in specific stressful situations, they would say, okay, let's all pause, time out, 5 seconds, time out, let's objectively try to evaluate this situation. Because when you're emotional, everything, most of the things can seem either too good, too bad, or the extremes tend to be highlighted versus the
Mhm.
objective truth, which is probably somewhere in between. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And what do you teach your students about emotions? Like, what do you try to teach them? And do you believe they can actually improve in dealing with emotions by studying or like studying it? Right?
So the course is, so in one sentence, the goal of the course is to teach usually pre-medical students, those who want to go into medical
Mhm.
school later, because this is a college course, meaning people are aged, between 19 and 22, more or less,
Mhm.
and then after that they go to medical school. So the main goal is to teach usually pre-med students the basic neurobiology about various emotions, happiness, sadness, empathy, all that stuff, but also the clinical aspects, the treatments, the diagnostic tools, all of that, about the most common psychiatric conditions: major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, and all of that. So we divide the course in 2 semesters. So the first semester is mostly around the neuroscience and neurobiology behind happiness, sadness, all of that. But the second semester, we literally, have students talk to a mock patient, right? So we don't have a real patient, but a mock patient with major depressive disorder undiagnosed. And the student needs to be able to recognize the symptoms, suggest diagnostic tools, how to actually make a diagnosis, and treatment options for this person. So it's not easy because in psychiatry, I'm not a psychiatrist here, but in psychiatry, it's, the vast majority of the diagnosis relies on just verbal communication with the patient. And you have to understand what to ask, when to ask it, and how to ask it. You can't just, bluntly ask a person anything because, you never know what the reaction might be, right? So you have to learn all of that, the psychiatric interview, basically, and then suggest treatment options. So that's why I teach. And, people are generally satisfied, especially with the clinical aspect of the course, because most of the other courses at college don't really have this clinical aspect, which pre-med students really like because it gives them a taste, a flavor of actual medicine. Although it's everything, it's in class, but it gives them at least a flavor of how it will look like when you actually have a real patient in front of you.
Yeah, it's funny because from what I understand, obviously I have limited knowledge, but most of these disorders are like based on the opinions of the like people assessing it, right? So like, how do you diagnose something that you
Yeah.
can't really test for objectively? So
Yeah.
it's definitely a very interesting field, which I know nothing about. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's you have to be experienced, and of course there are some major symptoms that differentiate major depressive disorder from generalized anxiety disorder, from schizophrenia, from some other conditions, but there's a ton of overlap as well. So for example, in bipolar disorder, you can have a patient that's sitting in front of you in a depressed state, right? Because bipolar people with bipolar disorders tend to fluctuate more or less between manic episodes, which can last weeks, right, or months even, and depressive episodes. So it's not like one day, really depends on the person. And if you catch a person who hasn't been diagnosed with anything with bipolar disorder in a depressed state, you can actually think, oh, this person actually has major depressive disorder. And then you have to ask targeted questions. For example, in the past, have you ever had manic episodes? Obviously, you're not going to say manic episodes, but you're going to ask targeted questions that are symptoms of manic episodes. So people, who can't sleep, who eat a lot, who do all sorts of things. So you ask those targeted questions and then see if that person actually experienced a manic episode. And then if they did, you can actually say, well, this may be bipolar disorder. And then you have to differentiate whether it's bipolar disorder type 1 or type 2, depending on the severity of manic and depressive episodes. But some people can have overlap, not just bipolar disorder. So targeted questions a lot based on experience. And again, I am not a psychiatrist here, but in sleep, many people with psychiatric conditions do indeed have sleep disturbances. And that's how I interact also with patients with psychiatric conditions, but primarily because of the sleep disturbances they have. I think the statistic is more than 70 or 80% of patients with major depressive disorder, which is extremely common, have a sleep disturbance, by the way. And those sleep disturbances can actually exacerbate or worsen the underlying MDD, major depressive disorder. And those sleep disturbances can also increase the risk of major depressive disorder down the road if that person doesn't have MDD currently at this moment. So it's very, very intertwined, psychiatry and sleep disorders.
Yeah, it's almost like a negative flywheel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it definitely. I mean, yeah, I'm not a doctor, but it's definitely interesting, I'd say.
Psychiatry is fascinating. It's basically a window. Some people say window into a person's soul, right? But more neurologically speaking, it's window into a person's brain. And it's amazing that if you think that a person's brain has around 80 billion neurons, right? 80, 85 billion, which is a massive number. And Additionally, a brain has another 80 to 85 billion support cells, which support, protect, and nourish all of these neurons. So there's a ton of cells in the brain.
Mhm.
And how these cells are wired can really make an amazingly big difference in terms of the risk for psychiatric disorders, the risk for neurologic disorders, your personality, all of that
Mhm.
stuff is basically determined by the wiring between these neurons. And that's just, if you think about that, I think it's fascinating, not even from a
Mhm.
doctor's perspective, but just almost a philosophical perspective.
Yep.
You are your neurons, you are basically, your personality is determined how your neurons are wired, which
Mhm.
seems fascinating, right?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. It's like definitely very interesting. And one question I want to ask you, following up on what you said, is how do you make sure that you design the right questions so they are precise and you get what you
Yeah,
want from that without yeah, touching on some sensitivities and so on, because it happens all the time that you maybe say something that you thought was perfectly okay, but it triggers something that you didn't know on the other person. And
of
yeah,
course.
how do you juggle with that, I guess?
Yeah. So first of all, so for example, I'll tell you, um, with patients with sleep disorders that
Mm,
also have a psychiatric condition. So even if you don't know, for example, that the person has a psychiatric condition, you always have this very brief introductory 2-3 minute chat, just very casual. How's your day? What have you been doing this week? Just to try to get to know the person or get a feel for the person. Because if a patient has major depressive disorder, sometimes in the first few minutes you really can get a good idea that the person actually has that. Because people tend to say when they come to you, if they have major depressive disorder, for example, oh, I've been doing nothing for the past few days. I've just been sleepy all day. And
mhm,
that's not normal for a 25-year-old person doing nothing all day, feeling sleepy all day,
mhm,
just the energy kind of low, right? Obviously, I'm
mhm.
simplifying things,
Yeah.
but then based on the first few minutes, you always have a set. I don't want to say predetermined set, but roughly speaking, a set of questions that you have to ask to understand the character of the person, to understand whether the person is mentally healthy or not so healthy, right? And those questions can range from how has your childhood been, right? The, Even if a person is 40 or 50, you want to ask, how's your childhood been? Did you have any childhood trauma? How's the relationship with your parents? Are your parents alive? All of those things, right? That can potentially indicate a trauma. Some people experience childhood traumas and then 30 years later develop a major depressive disorder or some other disorder, right? So balancing those types of questions and being very, very cautious about how you frame those questions. Of course, sometimes
Mhm,
and often actually in psychiatry, you have to ask the tough questions, right? Sometimes questions that seem inappropriate, but you have to ask them to understand the person, right? But you
mhm,
frame them in a way that's not incredibly direct and sometimes which may seem disrespectful, right? So you have to
mhm.
obviously respect the person and frame those questions around that. I don't have a answer, do this and this,
Yeah,
because
it's not a
psychiatry,
checklist.
as we mentioned, it's most of it is verbal, talking to a patient in terms of diagnosing the patient. Whereas other conditions, cardiology, right? In cardiology, obviously, in all of these, it's important to talk to the patient. But if you want to diagnose a heart attack, it's not like you're just talking to the patient, right? You do some tests and then you see, black on white, okay, this person is having a heart attack, which is accompanied by the symptoms that person is telling you. But in psychiatry, you can't really do a test for major depression. You can't really do a test for schizophrenia, right? So for schizophrenia, you always ask about hallucinations. Did you ever hallucinate? What were those hallucinations like? Were they visual? Were they vocal hallucinations? Tell me more about them. When did they happen? Why did they happen? Were they triggered by something? So all of those things, and in sleep as well. So people with, I'll just say this and then you can stop me. So there's a condition called REM sleep behavior disorder, RBD. So for people who are not familiar, REM sleep is one of the 4 sleep stages, which is completely normal, and people go through it during the night, right? And in that stage, people should be almost completely paralyzed, meaning not move in bed, completely paralyzed. And in those, in that sleep stage, most of the dreams actually happen. So you want the person to be paralyzed because you don't want the person to act out their dreams. In people with REM sleep behavior disorder, that muscle atonia, meaning lying completely still, is gone, and people start physically acting out their dreams. They start kicking, they start punching, they start throwing themselves, in bed, or they fall out of bed very, very often. And the problem with that, and why I want to touch upon the psychiatric question you asked, is down the road, 10, 15 years after diagnosis, the majority, actually, I think the statistics are between 50 and 70%. So that's the majority of people develop a neurological condition, such as Parkinson's disease, which many people probably have heard of, or some other neurodegenerative conditions. Why am I saying this? Because in some of these conditions, not necessarily Parkinson's, but some other neurological conditions, people can have hallucinations, completely visual hallucinations, as if it's happening, something is in real life happening in front of them. And why is that important? Because if none of these conditions are diagnosed and you have a patient coming into you and saying, I hallucinate, you ask them obviously a question about hallucination, and then they tell you, well, I hallucinated 3 times in the past 3 months. I saw a person in the backyard who was speaking to me in some foreign language that I didn't understand, or the person was breaking into my house. These hallucinations can be very vivid and seem very real. You have to think about, does this person have a psychiatric condition? Does this person have a sleep condition, such as REM sleep behavior disorder? We need to test it. So that's why you have this set of questions that you have to go through in order to exclude potential sleep conditions or psychiatric conditions. So
nice. Yeah. Okay. So switching gears a bit, I have a question submitted by a friend, and he's developing basically a system to detect early signs of PTSD among military personnel using computer vision. So
very good.
Yeah. So besides dark circles under the eyes, what other physical signs can indicate sleep deprivation? And also, how does cortisol levels affect sleep? So these are 2 separate questions, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. The second one is kind of quick. So sleep deprivation is a stressful state. So most people, at least in the short term, meaning days and weeks, who sleep poorly do have elevated cortisol levels. That's undeniable. But what's also undeniable is people who are under stress have higher cortisol levels, at least in the shorter term, and those higher cortisol levels can impact sleep quality. So it's a vicious circle, basically. So that's the answer to the second question. The first question is, apart from the obvious, what you mentioned, the dark circles around the eyes, just the face that looks kind of dry, the skin doesn't look as shiny as it should, the person does not look great. Apart from that, many times you have people with mood swings who sleep poorly. So I am more anxious about a routine thing than I should be. You miss the bus, right? The bus, is in front of you and you miss it, and then you go crazy. That's not a normal reaction to missing the bus. Maybe you're sleep deprived, right? So those types of mood swings, or just being overly aggressive, anxious when you're in communication with people, right? You get agitated way too quickly to something that really you shouldn't get agitated. So those are also very, very common. Another common thing is people who sleep poorly are very tired during the day. So they want a nap, their eyes start closing, maybe not at 8 a.m., but at
Mm.
4 p.m., when the day is already, half gone, people feel tired, concentration levels go down. Especially, I'll mention this, if they're professional drivers, buses, trucks, airplanes, whatever, that's terrible because when you sleep poorly, you're not going to be able to drive as well as when you sleep normally. So logical reasoning goes down, concentration levels go down, energy levels go down. All of these are symptoms of sleep deprivation. But I feel like just when you see a person, when you talk to a person, you can tell if that person is rested or not rested. And then
Mm.
the cause of that unrestedness may be sleep deprivation, but maybe something else. You can never exclude that, other, when we're talking about, medicine, other conditions. Maybe they're sleeping perfectly fine, but maybe they have a thyroid issue. Maybe they're anemic. Maybe they have a psychiatric issue. Maybe they have a neurologic issue. Maybe they have cancer in the end. Maybe they're undergoing radiotherapy. You never know, right? So that's why, and I'm saying this because when you see a person in the street that doesn't seem all that, let's say, normally behaving, you never
Mhm.
know what's going on, in their life, in their
Mhm.
personal life, with their body, with somebody, with somebody's friend, mother, father. You never know. And I never judge, a person when you see somebody in the street that isn't behaving as they should be, because their life might be 100 times tougher than yours. And maybe, the way they're behaving is actually good when you think about the potential problems they might have. So
Mm. Yeah, cool. I have another funny one here.
sure.
So it has to do with sleeping with a partner. So, are
Yeah.
there any notable effects or changes when sleeping with a partner? Are there any studies on how sharing a bed impacts sleep? And I imagine, for instance, that room temperature might play a role and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll say this, which is probably the most important sentence to this question that I'll say: loneliness. And I'm
Mm.
not speaking sleeping in bed with somebody or
Mm.
not. I'm speaking loneliness in general. So very few friends, not many social interactions, is a very very important factor when it comes to not only mental health but also sleep. So
Mm.
loneliness definitely impacts mental health first, and then sleep as a consequence of poor mental health. Sleeping with a bed partner, I have not seen studies. Well, I'll say this: I have not seen robust, repeatable studies that
Mhm.
show sleeping with a bed partner versus not can actually improve your sleep. I'm not saying here that one of the bed partners has a sleep disorder. I'm saying both bed partners completely fine, healthy people. I don't know if sleeping with or without a bed partner is better or worse for sleep quality. And I'm sure, David, when you go to, online or Google, you will find a study that says,
Yeah.
oh, it's 15%. But please, for everyone, you know nowadays there are so many publications, and almost anyone can publish anything. So it's critical that people who, when you see a paper, a scientific study, right, published, you do not take it as 100% true. You never know what was, the motive of the study, what was the quality of the methodology. You never know.
Mm.
I mean, I can talk about this for an hour, but the
Yeah.
point is, when you see a study, you cannot say, oh, that's true, and I'm going to take it as is, because many studies, I think the statistic is 60 or 70% of studies are not repeatable. And that's
Mm.
terrible, meaning that the effect, when somebody else takes the exact same stuff that you took in Portugal, I take here, in the United States, do the same thing, I cannot get the same result, or not
Mm.
nearly the same result, which is a huge problem in and of itself, right? So that's why I'm sad to see when media outlets find a very, curious paper and then say, "Oh, did you guys know that sleeping with a bed partner can improve your sleep by 35%?" Come on, guys, come on, right? Let's not be children. Let's behave like adults. If there are 10 studies with the same methodology proving the same thing, great. If there's one study in a random journal, let's please be cautious. That's what I want to
Mhm.
say.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. And another question is there an optimal sleep position according to research?
Um, I will say that generally speaking, sleeping on your back might be worse than sleeping on your side. Why? I'm saying this because sleep apnea, which is a very common condition, which is a condition when people stop breathing during the night for at least 10 seconds many times during the night, 50, 100, 150 times during the night or more, they stop breathing. And that is much more common when you're sleeping on your back. Why?
Mm.
Because usually what happens in sleep apnea is you stop breathing because your tongue falls backwards and it covers your airway. And then air cannot go through because your tongue is covering your airway. And that's much more common when you're sleeping on your back than on your side for
Mm.
logical reasons. And I'm saying this also because most of the sleep apnea patients are not diagnosed, meaning they're not even aware they have sleep
Mm.
apnea, and then they sleep on their back, and then they feel tired in the morning, headaches in the morning, even though it appears that they slept completely normally. Because you cannot know if you're sleeping in bed alone that you have
Mm.
sleep apnea. Somebody needs to tell you, hey, you stop breathing 100 times during the night. That's not
Mm.
good. You should go see a sleep doctor, right?
Yeah.
So maybe, maybe having said all this, maybe it's better to sleep with a bed partner than not. But yeah. So and what was the other part of the question? I forgot because I was
Yeah.
just rambling. Yeah.
I think it was like on the optimal. Yeah. Was there any optimal sleep position according to research?
So I would say for the majority of people with no conditions that preclude you from sleeping on the side to sleep on your side, right?
Mm.
Some people, for various conditions, are not advised to sleep on their side,
Mm.
or, for example, laying flat. Some people, for
Mm.
some heart conditions, are not advised to sleep completely flat. They should,
Mm.
elevate the upper part of their body for some, for some medical reasons. So,
Mm.
for the general audience, on your side, I wouldn't say it's like unbelievably better, but just
Mm.
to be on the safer side, if you maybe have sleep apnea, why not sleep on your side, or why not
Mm.
get tested if you're
Mm.
actually tired in the morning, have headaches, all of that stuff, but it seems like you're sleeping fine. Maybe you should
Mm.
get tested. And it's very
Mm.
simple to get tested, really. And you can get tested at your home. Even in Portugal, in Croatia, you can get tested, in your home. You don't have to go to the hospital, and it's very easy, very quick. And I feel like everybody should get tested. So,
Nice. Yeah. And another interesting question is that I see that maybe it's just like an illusion, but that there's some pattern between like how young people sleep and adults or like older people. So how does sleep change as we age? And
yeah.
is it true that older people need less sleep or like they sleep worse? Like what's the statistics in that?
It's great that you're bringing this up because I'll first answer the last part of the question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a misconception that older people need less sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So, according to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, adults from 18 to 65 and above 65 need a minimum of 7 hours of sleep, including people who are 80. But usually, the problem with people who are 80 or 90 and they wake up early or wake up in the middle of the night, usually the reason why they sleep shorter is because they have sleep disturbances that preclude them from sleeping 7 to 9 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Now going back to the first part of the question, sleep evolves as we age, and it's fascinating actually how it evolves. So when we're born, when we're in Pampers diapers, when we're 1 month or 2 months old, it's normal for us to sleep 16 or 17 hours a day. And usually those 16 or 17 hours are not in continuity. It's like 3 hours, 2 hours, 5 hours, 3 hours, right? And it's 17, more or less 15, 17 hours in total. As we age, as we go into primary school, it's normal that we start sleeping less and more consistently. So people for example, in primary school can normally sleep during the night, sometimes do have a nap right after
Mhm.
school, but start to have this consolidated night sleep, which babies don't. Babies can sleep 3 hours and then they wake up and cry and then wake up, obviously, the parents,
Mhm.
and then the parents can't sleep either. But sleep, and I stopped at primary school, so we sleep less, 10 to 12 hours, 10 to 13 hours, I should say, and we start having this consolidated sleep. As we go into high school, consolidated sleep is completely normal. We start sleeping 8 to 10 hours. High school during the night. So people in high school or children in high school should sleep at least 8 hours, not 6 hours. Consolidated sleep. And it's normal in high school that this sleep starts usually later than when we're in primary school. So when we're in primary school, we go to bed at 9 or 10, not at 1 a.m. But as we age, our circadian clock, it's called, it shifts to later. So in adolescence, when we're 13, 14, 15 years of age, in high school, it's normal that we go to sleep at midnight or even 1 a.m. And
Mhm.
it's normal for us to wake up, if we didn't have school, at 8 a.m. or
Mhm.
7:38 or 9 a.m. And the problem with school timings, and that's a big issue in the United States as well, is that if you have a child that's going to bed at 1 a.m. Because they can't fall asleep earlier and wake up at 7, they're getting 6 hours of sleep, but they
Mhm.
should need 8 hours. They need 8 hours of sleep. So why not move the school times by an hour or 45 minutes after the regular school time? So for example, from 8 a.m. to 8:45 or 9 a.m., and actually help the child sleep more, feel better, and be healthier overall. It's not me making this stuff up. It's just scientific studies has shown if you move school start times by 45 minutes or an hour, the mental health of children goes up, the safety of children goes up. Because don't forget, in the United States, people can drive. In some
Mhm.
states, when they're 16, especially when they're 18, right? So
Mhm.
if you sleep poorly, you're not going to be as concentrated, all of that stuff. So you're more likely to have a car accident.
Mhm.
And longer term health is definitely benefiting when you're sleeping 8 hours. So after high school, you normally sleep even less, 7, 8 hours, and your circadian clock starts shifting actually earlier, not immediately after high school, but let's say in
Mhm.
your 40s or 50s, your clock starts shifting backwards, meaning you start going to sleep earlier. And then when you're 65, 70, you start feeling asleep even earlier, around 9 or 10 a.m., and you wake up at 5. And that's normal, how it should be. So really, sleep evolves from going to bed very early and sleeping a lot to
Mhm.
kind of shifting that clock to later and sleeping less. And then when we're older, we actually go back to sleeping 7 to 8 hours, but going to sleep earlier. So we're kind of going back this circle of life, circle of
Mhm.
sleep, basically.
Nice,
So,
interesting. Yeah, that's definitely very interesting, and I guess we can observe it in our own life, right?
absolutely.
Um, yeah, and
When do you go to sleep?
yeah, usually I go to sleep at 11, but I try to kind of wind down starting from 10:30. And when I was younger, I went to like sleep at 9, something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's fairly accurate with what you said. So like in high school, I started going later, and then I guess I aged early, so now I'm back to going earlier to bed. But yeah,
Cool.
it's just because also my classes at school and so on started really early, and uni
Yeah.
is kind of 1 hour away, so I have to wake
Oh,
up really early. So yeah,
yeah.
it's just adapting to my routine, I guess.
Try to get the 7 hours, please.
Yeah, definitely. I always, I would say my average would be above 8, because
Good.
uh just at night, because then I every day I took this from my grandmother. Every day I take a nap after lunch. Obviously if I have classes or something like that, I can skip 1 or 2 days, but I take like a 30-35 minute nap.
Good.
And yeah, so average I would say per day it's like 8 hours in 30 minutes or something.
That Yeah, that's pretty good. And I'll say one more thing. People, it's not great if you sleep for, if you're an adult and sleep over 9 hours, right? That sleeping
Mm,
over 9 hours is called hypersomnia, meaning you're
mm,
excessively sleeping. And that can be a
mm,
symptom in and of itself of an underlying medical condition, whether it's thyroid issues, I mentioned anemia, I mentioned, psychiatric conditions. So it's not the more the merrier.
mm.
There is this golden window, as we call it,
Yeah.
of 7 to 9 hours when you're an adult. So
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think from my own experience, like if I overworked or overstudied for a long time, or I'm feeling a bit down, like I tend to wake up and just want to sleep more.
yeah,
So it can also be like, I guess, yeah, a symptom or of something else you have going on.
yeah,
So
and
yeah.
people, when you sleep fewer hours than you need per
Hmm.
day, you accumulate something that's called sleep debt, just like financial debt.
Hmm.
Nobody likes to
Yeah.
see that on the balance sheet, right? Especially when interest rates are high. So yeah, we can
Hmm.
get that into later. But you accumulate this sleep debt, and that sleep debt, you actually have to pay it off. Figuratively
Hmm.
speaking, pay it off. Meaning, your body is going to want more sleep after a day of short sleep, and that's the
Hmm.
sleep that you accumulated. And if you try it on yourself, if you sleep for 2 days for 5 hours, the third day you're probably going to sleep 9 hours at
Hmm.
least, right? So that's
Yeah.
the sleep that some people accumulate during their whole life, which is obviously
Hmm.
not good.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Very interesting. So next question is very wide but very open. But let's see how you answer this. What's one question about sleep that you still don't know the answer to, but wish you did?
Yeah, why do we sleep 7 to 9 hours? I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah.
Why not 15? I mean, when we're adults, why do elephants sleep 3.5 hours? Why do giraffes sleep, I think, 2 hours? They're massive, their bodies are massive. So it's probably not the size of your body that's proportional to how much you
Mm-hmm.
sleep. I mean, cats are not that big animals, but
Hmm.
they sleep much more than humans. Why
Hmm.
is that the case? We don't know. So that's the most fundamental question. It seems so basic,
Hmm.
right? We don't know even why we sleep 7 to 9 hours. I would love to know, but I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's like a statistical fact that we yeah we get the most benefit from that. But I never thought like,
Yeah,
yeah, what's the reason behind that? It's
I don't know.
interesting.
We know what happens when you sleep poorly, but when you sleep for fewer than 7 hours for adults, but I don't know why we sleep
Mm.
7, 8 hours.
Yeah,
Fascinating to
yeah.
think of this.
Maybe it's just a theory I'm getting out there,
Yeah,
but maybe it's just like a
conspiracy theory.
no, like an evolutionary like kind of way of setting a balance, right? uh I don't know, maybe it's just like a yeah, stupid theory, but yeah,
Your guess
maybe.
is as good as mine.
Yeah,
We just don't know, and I don't think I don't think we will know at any point in the near future. How are you even going to test it?
yeah.
Like, I don't know how are you going to test it.
Hmm.
So I mean, the same. Okay, I won't go into philosophy, but it's very difficult, and I don't think we're going to know the answer. And maybe the most important thing is, do we even need to know the answer? Is that
Hmm.
even relevant?
Yeah,
If we if
we
we
don't, I think.
Yeah.
Would be
So
just for like intellectual curiosity, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, on the other hand, what's the most exciting or surprising discovery in sleep research from the past 5 years that came from, I guess, robust, repeatable studies?
Yeah, I love that. Um, that sleep, and that was probably my introductory sentence to the whole interview. That sleep is far from being just for the brain and off the brain.
Hmm.
Sleep is a whole body process. Studies have shown that even some neurological conditions, such as Parkinson's disease, which everybody associates with the brain, right,
Mm-hmm.
actually may start in the gastrointestinal system, and
Mm-hmm.
then because of some proteins that might migrate, they migrate from the gastrointestinal system to the brain, affecting Parkinson's, but also affecting sleep. So it's pretty amazing, to think that sleep affects so many or every cell in your body. That's amazing. And when I say amazing, I mean, when you it's so simple to fall asleep. Not for everyone, of course, but you go to bed, close your eyes, you don't need to do anything,
Yeah,
right?
literally.
But literally don't need to do anything. But every cell in your body is benefiting from it. And
Mm.
so many things are going on, behind the scenes.
Yeah,
That's fascinating to just to think about that.
yeah, yeah. Um, before the question before, you said you didn't want to get into philosophy,
Yeah.
but maybe I'll force you into that. And
Yeah.
what's the most interesting like philosophical question behind sleep? Because I guess all scientists or most scientists are also interested in philosophy, and they kind of try to approach it in a scientific way, right? So yeah, what's the question that excites you the most?
I'm thinking, from a philosophical way. Um, we, um, why did sleep evolve? Maybe that's evolutionary, but I'm still gonna try to twist it philosophically.
Mm-hmm.
What is the point of humans sleeping, and why do all animals sleep?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it, in the evolutionary theory, 200,000 years ago or 100,000 years, doesn't matter. Humans were just nomads, whatever. And what was the point of sleep? If you went to sleep for 8 hours, you could get killed, right? You
Mm-hmm.
could kill by an animal, you could kill by anything. So what is the point?
Mm-hmm.
Why do your cells in your body need 8 hours? That's a third of the day, to recover, regenerate, when you only have 16 hours left. So 8 hours for 16. I think that's a bad ratio. If you ask me,
Mm-hmm.
I would want 1 hour for 10 hours, 1 hour for 10 hours. So I don't understand, even philosophically, why why is this state that we call sleep a state where we're unconscious, stationary for 8 hours? What's the point?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I Do you maybe know the answer? Do you have a hypothesis? Because I don't.
No. My actually my hypothesis is the whole equilibrium balance thing. I guess like
Okay.
whoever created us or whatever created us like kind of imposed a hard limit on like on because try not to sleep for 1 week. You'll
Terrible.
yeah. And so I guess it's could be that I have no idea, but it would make sense in my head, I guess. uh,
Definitely the equilibrium. But if you think about just life in general, I mean, the philosophy, like, what's the purpose of life?
mhm,
Like, from those very basic philosophy, I feel like most common philosophical
mhm,
questions, to the question is, what's the purpose of being awake?
mhm,
What's the purpose of being asleep? Why
mhm.
can't I just choose to be 24 hours awake? Choose to be, why is there a limitation set
Yeah, yeah,
on
yeah,
humans?
for sure.
I don't know.
Yeah,
So,
me
and it's a
neither.
big limitation. I had a person who wanted to desperately discover a way, to sleep less, but to feel cognitively still, at
Mhm,
a good level. He
mhm,
failed, but doesn't matter.
mhm.
It's extremely difficult. Extremely difficult.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like speaking on a worldwide level, if someone invented like a tool or medicine or whatever that you could sleep 1 or 2 hours less, imagine what a massive increase in productivity that would
Yeah,
be. But
amazing. It
But
would be
maybe
amazing.
it wouldn't, unless like
Fair.
you would have to have the same cognitive like benefits, right, for less time. But
Yeah, exactly. And maybe if you slept for 2 hours instead of, let's say, eight, and you had those 6 hours, maybe people would say, "Oh, I have a bonus 6 hours. I'm just gonna go to the beach
yeah,
or go hiking. Maybe not do something productive for society." So
yeah,
also philosophical,
yeah, yeah,
but yeah,
yeah.
maybe
Okay.
it's actually better that we have a limitation. We know we have to sleep 7 8 hours,
Mhm.
and then use your 16 hours or lose them.
Yeah,
Maybe it's even better this
yeah. I think I'm happy with where we stand. I wouldn't, if
way.
someone would tell me like you can pay X amount and sleep less, I would say no. I like to sleep,
Yeah,
so it's good this way.
yeah,
Okay, maybe I have two more questions and we can
sure.
wrap up because I'm sure you have a lot of cool things to do.
Including
um,
this podcast.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so are there any must-have gadgets or technologies to
yeah,
maximize sleep efficiency and quality? So I
yeah.
guess you're not sponsored by anyone, so you can
I'm
give
not.
an unbiased.
I am not. Yeah, and very common question. Which is the best wearable device for measuring sleep? That's how usually people frame it. Hear it all the time. So, um, if you want to measure sleep quality, meaning not only when you go to sleep and when you wake up, but everything that happens in between, um, all the stages of sleep, how they're going through. Are you cycling properly and optimally through all the sleep stages, the duration of all the sleep stages, the percentage of all the sleep stages in total sleep time. That's
Mhm.
all super relevant and super important for quality sleep. If you want to measure that, the gold standard, I don't even know, this is also philosophical. Why do we call it the gold standard? Why not the
Mhm.
diamond standard? Doesn't matter because the prices of diamonds go down, I guess. Um, in any case, so the gold standard currently is something called polysomnography. So, in very simple terms, polysomnography is a diagnostic method where you go to a sleep clinic in a hospital.
Mhm.
They put some electrodes on your head to measure brain activity. And based on brain activity, you can determine if a person is in stage one or REM sleep or deep sleep or any
Mhm.
stage of sleep. That's the gold standard. If you want to measure brain activity on your wrist, that's obviously not possible, right? So inherently, and I know it sounds so simple, but inherently, these devices are flawed when it comes to measuring the stages of sleep. But they use certain sensors, such as accelerometers, or some of them have microphones. Some of them, measure your breathing rate, heart rate, all of that stuff. And then from all of that data, based on large data sets, they infer in which sleep stage you are, in stage one or two or three, because each sleep stage, I don't want to say, I'll reframe this. Your heart rate and breathing rate differ between stages of sleep.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not as clear cut. So,
Mhm.
for example, when you fall deeper asleep, your heart rate goes down and your breathing rate goes down. In REM sleep, your heart rate goes up, your breathing rate goes up, but it's not so clear cut,
Mhm.
right? And the problem is you cannot be 100% accurate in determining sleep stages only from heart rate or breathing rate or movements, right? So that's the problem with those devices. So I'll say, based on the latest sleep studies, and this is again, the methodological issues are there because you have to have a certain number of people in these studies. You have to have a certain, the whole environment needs to be perfect for you to measure in the best possible way sleep quality using these devices. And if you
Mhm.
measure it in Portugal, I measure it in Croatia, or somebody measured in the United States, the accuracy of these devices can actually vary. So the most accurate ones are, and I'm not gonna obviously sponsor, and I don't have any watch. I just have a mechanical watch because I love mechanical watches. The whole precision is fascinating. behind them, but doesn't matter. So I don't have, I mean, I have these devices, but I don't wear them. That's,
Yeah.
I got these devices, so it's great just to test them, but I don't wear them. Apple Watch, Aura Ring, and Whoop are probably the three most precise devices.
Mhm.
And when I say most precise, I mean they're pretty good at determining time of time when you went to sleep, when you fell asleep, and time when you woke up. But you
Mhm.
can also do it yourself, right? You
Yeah.
know, you roughly know when you woke up and when you went to bed. But the sleep stages accuracy, depending on these depending on each of these three devices, is between 60-ish% and 70-ish%. So that's the
Mhm.
range, meaning 25 to 35-ish% of the time they're wrong in telling you
Mhm.
in which sleep stage you are, which is
Mhm.
not obviously diagnostically valuable. It's great, for you to have at home and get a rough idea, a very rough idea what's happening with your sleep, but you're not going to diagnose anything with that.
Right.
So those are the best, but with a grain of salt. Then Fitbit, Garmin are slightly worse than these devices, but still, I am sure you're going to find a study where Garmin is better than Apple. I'm sure because of the environment, because of the methodology. That's just how it, unfortunately, how it goes. And people need to be aware
Mhm.
of the limitations of these. But what I think is great in all of these devices is they're raising awareness about the importance of sleep. So you need
Mhm.
to actually track your sleep, even though it's
Mhm.
maybe not the most precise. You need to track your sleep. Why? Because it's super important for health, but also for performance. So I work with
Mhm.
athletes, with professional athletes on trying to improve their sleep quality. And obviously, sleep is critical for them if they want to be the fastest possible, the most accurate possible in tomorrow's game, right? So they track their
Mhm.
sleep and they're aware, at least the ones that I work with are aware of the limitations. And I think it's great to be aware of the
Mhm.
limitations of these devices. But again, great that these devices are promoting sleep importance, sleep wellness. But I don't think we're going to get to a stage in the next few years where you're going to be able to measure with 99% accuracy on your wrist the sleep stages, which
Yeah.
doesn't mean all of these are bad. I'm just saying this is the real world, right? These are the
Mhm.
limitations of these devices.
Hmm. Yeah, actually, my next question was on the athletes, because I think you can derive pretty interesting lessons from studying athletes because they
Yeah.
experience everything at such an extreme level.
Yes.
So I'm curious to know what do you typically work on, what do you recommend them, and I'm
Yeah.
especially curious on the pre-match kind of
Yeah.
recommendations or routine because I can't
Yeah.
imagine, for example, like if I have an exam or something, I'm able to sleep quite well, but it's inevitable to sometimes notice a difference or sleep slightly worse, right?
Yeah.
Imagine if you have like a Champions League final or like a I don't know,
Yeah.
like World Cup, whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me know everything.
Look, sleep is a major issue in athletes.
Mhm.
So I think the statistic is around 50%. And obviously, it's going to vary from sport to sport and so on. But 50% around of athletes have sleep disturbances. And around 2 in 3 athletes, so that 2/3 of athletes, experience daytime sleepiness, which is a
Mhm.
massive number of people. Why? Because of the lifestyle, especially at high level competition. So like NBA,
Mhm.
top level European football, soccer clubs that travel all the time, play 3 games a week, and so on and so forth. NBA, crazy the number of games these guys
Yeah.
play, and really respect to all these people who, like all these athletes who endure all of that. And the
Mhm.
travel in the NBA is amazing. I mean, I feel like they're on the plane more than actually on the basketball court.
Yeah.
Um, so pre-game, so it's very difficult to. I'll start with this. You first have to explain to the athlete why they need to sleep 7, 8, or 9 hours and why they need to pay attention to their sleep. Because 25-year-old guys or girls don't care about diabetes 30 years down the road. Their health, they're like at the top of their game. Why in the world would I care about diabetes? Which poor sleep increases the risk of. So you have to explain to them, look, if you sleep poorly, if you have the World Cup tomorrow, the difference between winning and losing a game, scoring and not scoring, could be like 10 millimeters or 10 centimeters or whatever, right? Depending on the sport. And if you sleep well, your concentration is going to go up, your shooting accuracy is going to go up, your abilities to make a good decision in the game, especially in team sports, is going to go up, and you're going to be faster. The sprint times are faster. So you sleep to actually win tomorrow, not to prevent diabetes. I mean, obviously, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sleep for the win, right? So that's the first thing. And most of the athletes really resonate with that. I am going to work with you to help you sleep better, to win more, to win better. And after you get through that first step, then depending on the club, on the team, on the athlete, I usually work either on jet lag problems. So, for example, in the NBA, I'm not saying it's massive jet lag, but still, when they travel from Los Angeles to Boston, it's a 3-hour difference. And they're usually in Boston for a day and a half. And 3 hours is a significant, amount of time. Why am I saying this? Because when you travel from Boston to LA, right, you travel the day before the game, usually, right? When you arrive there, you're already 3 hours behind. Meaning, when the game starts in LA at 8 p.m., in Boston, it's 11 p.m., which means your body starts feeling sleepy, right? And you have to start playing a game, which obviously is not great. So you have to manage that jet lag, that small but significant jet lag, using caffeine, using bright light therapy, and using targeted sleep periods, right? So depending on when they're traveling, where they're traveling, I recommend different things. So that's one, the jet lag. The other thing, which is much more common, is just insomnia. The athlete can't sleep, can't fall asleep, can't maintain sleep, stress, anxiety, excitement, anger around the game. Whether they win or lose a game, it's not good. If they lose a game, they're anxious and stressed. If they win a game, they're super excited, and neither is good for sleep, right? So that's the problem. And don't forget, if these guys travel for the Champions League, from London to Berlin, which is not a long flight, but even if they travel for an hour, they need to get back after the game to London, right? So they finish a game at 11 p.m. Some of them do sleep over, but some of them don't. They finish a game at 11. Don't forget the doping test, midnight or whatever, 12:30. Then they go to a plane, and then they arrive at London at 1:30 or 2 a.m., which is terrible, obviously, for sleep. So you have to try to minimize, you can't cure it. You have to minimize the next day's symptoms of poor sleep, right? So that's what I work with. The second thing, and the third thing, is general insomnia that's not necessarily related to a game, right? So player just can't fall asleep, can't maintain sleep, and that's similar to a non-athlete when they can't fall asleep. So you recommend the sleep hygiene things that we talked about: no light, no phone, all of that stuff, which is difficult when you're on Instagram or TikTok. That's very difficult, or other social media. And don't forget, really, the lifestyle of these athletes, which can be extremely dynamic, especially at top clubs. When I say dynamic, I mean all the sponsorship agreements, all the training sessions, all of that stuff, very, very demanding. And you have to balance all of that with quality sleep. So that's not easy. And then you have to take a personalized approach. What's the goal? Is the goal for you to be able to fall asleep faster? Is the goal for you to sleep 7 hours? What's the goal, right? It's not just, I want to sleep better. What does that mean? Because you have to adapt to the lifestyle of elite athletes. You can't just say, hey, you're going to go to bed at 11 and wake up at 7. That's not going to work, right? And nobody's going to listen to you. So you have to adapt, and that's the personalized approach. You have to work with the player. And very rarely, I will say, and I'll finish with this, very, very, very rarely do athletes need a medication to fall asleep. It's usually the stress, anxiety, or poor sleep hygiene that leads to poor sleep. Sometimes, but very rarely they need medication.
Nice. I think I'll stop here. Otherwise, we
Sure,
can keep talking forever.
we can.
Uh, and yeah, I guess we'll have definitely other chances to ask questions in the future.
Awesome.
So yeah, Alan, it was a true pleasure to ask questions and learn from you. And maybe I don't know if you want to say some last words before we end this wonderful interview.
Yeah, of course, David. It's great talking to you. I feel like, as usual, it's just like a coffee chat. I didn't really feel interviewed as such, so it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
great. And really, if anybody, if your listeners has any questions, they can always feel free to reach out to me. Email, LinkedIn, or where Instagram,
Mhm.
wherever they want to. I'm more than happy to help.